My name is Sarah. I'm 27 years old, and I just got married last month. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The flowers were perfect. The dress I wore was the one I used to sketch in my notebook when I was 13, dreaming of falling in love. My now husband, Brian, stood at the end of the aisle with that goofy smile he always gets when he's nervous. The music, the guests, the sunset, everything felt magical. Except one thing. My dad didn't show up. He wasn't sick. He wasn't traveling. He wasn't in the hospital. He just didn't come. And that's not even the worst part. Because when I called him that morning, with my hand shaking and my eyes already stinging with tears, he picked up and told me he didn't believe I deserved a wedding. Not because I did something wrong. Not because I hurt someone. But because, in his words, "You've always been a disappointment, Sarah. I didn't raise you for this." Now, you might think that's where the story ends. That it's just another sad tale of a girl with a cold-hearted father. But you'd be wrong. Because what my dad didn't know was, I was going to make sure he regretted every single word he said to me that day. And I got the last laugh. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back. Way back. Before the wedding, before Brian, before I ever wore makeup or kissed a boy or dreamed of white dresses and I-dos. I need to take you back to the very beginning, when my dad started showing me who he really was. Growing up, I thought my dad was a superhero. He wore a suit to work, always smelled like expensive cologne, and had a voice that could quiet a room. He wasn't the kind of dad who threw baseballs in the backyard or helped with science projects. But when he walked into the house, people noticed. He had that presence. You know? The kind that made my little heart puff up with pride. But there were cracks. Small ones at first. Like when he forgot my 9th birthday because he had more important meetings. Or when he told my mom to keep Sarah quiet whenever I tried to show him something I made at school. I used to sit on the staircase at night, hiding behind the wooden rail, listening to him talk about me like I was a burden. A mistake. Mom would defend me sometimes, but she was quiet, soft. The kind of woman who lit candles even when there was no special occasion. She passed away when I was 16, and that's when everything got worse. After the funeral, I remember him looking at me with those cold eyes and saying, "Well, now it's just us." But it didn't feel like us. It felt like I was alone in a house with a man who didn't want me there. The years after Mom died were lonely. I wasn't allowed to cry. "Crying is weak," he said. I wasn't allowed to bring friends over. They'll make a mess. I wasn't allowed to go to dances or date or even join the drama club because the arts are for people who don't want real jobs. Still, I tried. I tried so hard to make him see me, to love me. I got straight A's. I worked after school. I applied to colleges he liked, picked majors he approved of, dressed the way he thought I should. I gave up piano, the one thing that made me feel alive, because he said it was a waste of time. And through it all, he never once said, "I'm proud of you." Then one day, everything changed. I met Brian. It was the spring of my senior year in college. I was working at a bookstore on weekends, and Brian came in looking for a copy of The Great Gatsby. He said it was for his sister's literature class, but later admitted he just wanted to impress a girl he was dating. We talked for hours that day. And he didn't just listen, he heard me, my opinions, my fears, my dreams. It was so new, so unfamiliar, someone actually cared. Brian came from a loud, messy, loving family. Sunday dinners, group texts, game nights. I was terrified the first time I met them. I thought they'd think I was weird or too quiet or not family enough. But they didn't. His mom hugged me. His dad called me kiddo. His sister painted my nails while we watched The Bachelor. They made me feel like I belonged. And when Brian proposed to me 2 years later, I said yes before he even finished asking. That's when I made the decision. I was going to invite my dad to the wedding. Not because I wanted him there, but because I needed him to see it. To see what love looked like. What family looked like. What I looked like, standing tall in a life I built without his help. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd look at me and realize he was wrong all those years. So I called him. And at first he sounded surprised. Then amused. You're getting married? He said with a laugh. To who? Some artist. No, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. To Brian. He's a software engineer. He's wonderful. There was a long pause. And then he said the words that burned themselves into my brain forever. I won't be there, Sarah. I don't support this. I don't support you. You've always been a disappointment. And I didn't raise you for this. He hung up. I stared at the wall for a long time. Then I looked at the dress hanging in the corner of my room. Ivory lace. Sleeveless. The same one from my childhood drawings. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood up, walked over to the dress, and ran my fingers down the fabric. And I knew, in that moment, what I had to do. Because you don't spend your whole life fighting to be seen, only to let someone else write your ending. This was my story. And I was going to make sure it ended on my terms. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Because 3 weeks before the wedding, my dad did something I never expected. Something that would flip everything upside down. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting on the couch in my apartment, flipping through the RSVP list with Brian when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up. I was so used to spam calls and weird voicemails about car warranties that I almost hit decline without a second thought. But something stopped me. I answered. Hello. A woman's voice. Calm, professional. Hi. Is this Sarah Williams? Yes. Who's calling? I'm calling from Chambers and McIntyre Law Offices. I represent your father, Mr. Donald Williams. My stomach dropped. The woman continued, her tone polite but cold. Your father has made some changes to his estate. He's requested a formal notification be sent to you. But I was asked to call first to inform you you've been removed as beneficiary. I blinked, stunned. Wait, what? He has removed you from his will. You no longer have legal inheritance rights. All assets will be passed to a charitable foundation he's establishing. I can send the paperwork for your review. I couldn't speak. I didn't even know how to respond. I wasn't calling this man to ask for money. I didn't want his money. But this was something else. She must have sensed the silence on my end because her tone shifted, just slightly. I understand this might be difficult to process. If you'd like to contest the will. I laughed. I actually laughed. No. I'm good, I said. Thanks for the call. I hung up and stared at Brian. What was that? He asked, sitting forward. My dad, I said, a small, bitter smile on my face. He cut me out of the will. Brian raised his eyebrows. Wow. That's dramatic. No. It's petty, I said. He wanted to hurt me again. One more time. Brian reached for my hand and squeezed it. Then let's show him he didn't. At first, I wasn't sure what that meant. How do you show someone they didn't break you when they've spent your whole life trying? But slowly, the idea started forming in my mind. A way to take all the pain, the rejection, the insults, and turn it into something unforgettable. Not revenge, exactly. Something better. It started small. I called the florist and changed the order. No more white roses. I wanted sunflowers. Bright, golden, unapologetic. The kind of flower that turns toward the sun no matter what. I replaced the string quartet with a gospel choir. My mom loved gospel music. She used to play Mahalia Jackson on Sunday mornings while she made pancakes and danced barefoot in the kitchen. The last time I saw my mom dance, I was 10. She was wearing a red scarf and spinning in circles while I laughed from the counter. I wanted to remember that on my wedding day. I ordered a charm with her photo on it and asked the seamstress to sew it into the lining of my dress, right over my heart. Every choice I made from that point on was for the people who loved me, who showed up, who believed in me. And slowly, the day became something different. It wasn't about proving anything to my father anymore. It was about celebrating in spite of him. The day before the wedding, I got a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a card. On the front, it read, "Regret is heavy." I opened it. And there, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words. Don't expect me to come. No, sorry. No, I'm proud of you anyway. Just cold, final rejection. Again. I sat with that card for a long time. My hands didn't shake this time. My heart didn't race. Instead, I got up, walked to the kitchen, lit a candle for my mom, and burned the card. Ashes don't talk. And then came the wedding day. The sun was shining. The choir was rehearsing in the garden. My best friend, Leah, was fixing my veil and trying not to cry. Brian's sister was buzzing around with a clipboard like a military commander. Brian himself had texted me earlier, "I'm ready to marry you whenever you stop being so hot." I laughed so hard, I nearly ruined my makeup. Guests were arriving, laughing, taking photos, hugging, family, friends, people who mattered. Then, just as I was getting ready to walk down the aisle, there was a commotion near the front gate. Leah's phone buzzed, and her eyes went wide when she looked at it. "What?" I asked, suddenly nervous. She turned the screen toward me. It was a blurry photo from one of the groomsmen taken just outside the venue. And in the photo was my dad, wearing a suit, standing stiffly in the crowd of people alone. I stared at the screen, stunned. "What is he doing here?" I whispered. Leah blinked. "Do you want security to tell him to leave?" I looked down at my dress. The charm with my mom's picture brushed against my heart. "No," I said. I stood up straighter. "He can stay." The choir began to sing. The doors opened, and I walked. Every step down that aisle felt like a thunderclap. Not because of him, but because of me. Because I had made it here. I had chosen love. I had built a family. I had turned pain into joy, rejection into beauty. And I wasn't going to let anyone steal that moment from me. I met Brian at the altar. His eyes were shining. "You look like everything I've ever wanted," he whispered. And just as the officiant began to speak, I saw my father, standing at the back, stone-faced, watching. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had planned something. A surprise. A gift. And it would change everything. Because right before we said our vows, I turned to the guests and revealed the first part of my plan. And that's when everything exploded. The guests went silent as I turned to face them, my veil brushing softly against my shoulders, the warm wind catching the edge of my dress. Brian looked confused but didn't move. He trusted me. That was the thing about Brian, he never tried to control the narrative. He just stood by me no matter what. I scanned the crowd slowly until my eyes landed on my father. Still in the back. Still alone. His arms were crossed, mouth tight, eyes cold. But I saw it. A flicker. The tiniest hesitation in his posture. He didn't expect this. He didn't expect me. I took a deep breath. "I hope everyone will allow me just a moment before we say our vows," I said into the mic. "There's something I want to say. Actually, there's something I've needed to say for a long time." A ripple of curiosity moved through the guests. Heads turned. Phones lowered. The choir behind us fell silent. Brian gave me the smallest nod. "Go ahead." So I did. I spent a lot of my life feeling like I was invisible. Like no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. Not smart enough. Not good enough. Not worthy enough. And for a long time, I believed that. I paused, voice trembling for just a moment. But not anymore. Because every person here, every smile, every hug, every ounce of love you've given me, has helped rewrite the story I used to tell myself. I turned slightly, facing the back rows. And to the person who told me I wasn't enough, "I want to thank you." A few gasps echoed. Brian's fingers tightened around mine. "Because without your silence, I wouldn't have found my voice. Without your rejection, I wouldn't have found people who embraced me. And without your absence, I wouldn't have learned how to truly show up for myself." My eyes met his. He didn't blink. He didn't move. But I swear, his jaw clenched. Then I turned back to Brian. "And now, I get to marry the man who saw me for who I was before I ever did. The man who loves every part of me, even the parts one used to hide." Brian's eyes shimmered with tears, but he held steady. The guests were silent. A reverent, electric kind of silence. "I came here today to be a bride," I said. "But I've never felt more like me." And for the first time in my life, that's enough. Applause broke out like a wave. Leah sobbed into her bouquet. Brian kissed my hand. The officiant cleared his throat, visibly emotional. And in the very back, my father walked out. He turned around and left. Didn't say a word. Didn't look back. Just like he always did. But this time, something was different. Because I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. The rest of the ceremony was like something out of a dream. Brian read his vows. He'd written them on notebook paper and folded them so many times the corners had gone soft. I don't know where we'll live in 10 years, he said. I don't know if we'll have a dog or 3 kids or a tiny apartment over a bakery. But I know I'll love you through all of it. Even the weird parts. Especially the weird parts. Laughter rolled through the guests, soft and full. We said, I do. We kissed. The choir burst into, oh, happy day. People clapped, danced, ate too much cake. My cousin Chloe twisted her ankle doing the Cupid shuffle and insisted on finishing the dance on one foot. And through it all, my heart felt light. But I didn't know that while I was smiling for photos and tossing my bouquet, my dad was already working on something else. Something I wouldn't find out about until 2 weeks later. Brian and I were still glowing in that post-wedding bubble. We weren't taking a honeymoon yet. He had to finish a huge software rollout at work, and I had just been offered a new position at a publishing company I adored. But it didn't matter. We were happy. Giddy even. We'd wake up every morning, look at our rings, and giggle like middle schoolers. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from the HR department at my new job.
Hi, Sarah.
Sorry to bother you, the woman said. But something came across my desk, and I thought I should confirm it with you. Sure, I said, not worried. She hesitated. We received a formal complaint today. Anonymous. It included a file, an email thread that supposedly shows you falsified parts of your resume. Claimed a degree you never finished and a job title that didn't exist. My stomach sank. What? Don't panic, she added quickly. We're not taking action yet. We just need to verify a few things. I never lied on my resume, I said, voice tight. I believe you. But can you send me a copy of your transcripts and your letter of recommendation from your former manager at Page Turner Publishing? Yes, of course, I said, already opening my files. As soon as I hung up, I knew. It was him. It had his fingerprints all over it. The timing, the pettiness, the precision. Cutting me out of the will hadn't been enough. Walking out of the wedding hadn't been enough. Now he wanted to take away the one thing I'd built all on my own, my career. I sent over everything HR needed. They cleared me by the end of the day. But the damage was done. Because now it was war. Brian found me that evening sitting on the floor of our living room, laptop open, eyes blank. He crouched next to me. I know that face, he said quietly. That's your I'm going to set something on fire face. I didn't smile. He tried to ruin my life. Again. Brian nodded. Then maybe it's time we stopped waiting for him to go away. What do you mean? He sat beside me and leaned in. You want the last laugh? He said. I looked at him. Yes. Then let's give the world the whole story. I tilted my head, confused. And that's when Brian showed me what he'd been working on for the last 2 weeks. A website. A simple, elegant webpage. With one very big surprise on it. And that surprise was about to go very public. Because the man who spent his life hiding behind power, silence, and manipulation was about to have all his secrets spilled. And I wasn't even the one who was going to spill them. Brian had found someone else. Someone from my dad's past. Someone with receipts. And once I saw what they had on him, I knew. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was justice. I stared at the laptop screen, not blinking. The website was sleek. Clean design, no flashy fonts or angry headlines, just a white background, soft gray text, and a title at the top that stopped my breath cold. The Truth About Donald J. Williams. I scrolled slowly. There was a photo of my father at a corporate dinner, laughing beside a group of men in tailored suits. Below it, in simple bullet points, were allegations, accusations, whistleblower testimonies, documents, emails, internal memos with his name at the bottom. My head was spinning. What is this? I whispered. Brian tapped a few keys and opened a second tab, an email exchange with someone named Megan Torres. She used to work for him, Brian said. Marketing exec. Quietly resigned 5 years ago. But not before documenting everything. She'd been compiling this stuff for years. I leaned closer, scanning the emails. Fraud. Sexist hiring practices. Charity funds rerouted to private accounts. Whistleblower suppression. My stomach churned. It wasn't just shady. It was criminal. Why is she telling you this now? I asked. She reached out after the wedding. My head snapped toward him. Wait, how would she even know about the wedding? Brian looked a little sheepish. I may have posted a video of your vows on Reddit. It went viral. Got like 2.7 million views. My mouth fell open. What? He grinned. People loved it. Girl stands up to emotionally abusive dad on wedding day. You should see the comments. It struck a nerve. I blinked, trying to process. So Megan saw it, Brian continued. Recognized your dad's name and emailed me. She said she's been waiting for someone to stand up to him. I leaned back slowly. The weight of it all settled over me. My father hadn't just failed as a parent. He'd been hiding who he really was from everyone. Until now. We didn't publish the site right away. We wanted to do it right. Megan agreed to go public. She was ready. She said she'd been sitting on this truth for far too long, and after seeing my speech at the wedding, she finally felt brave enough. We built the case slowly, gathered more testimonies. Former assistants, interns, even a junior accountant who remembered being screamed at for questioning a donation that didn't add up. One by one, they came forward. And the more I learned, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person he had silenced, every dream he crushed, every no that should have been a yes. We were careful, verified every claim, talked to a lawyer. We weren't publishing gossip. We were exposing a pattern of corruption that had hurt dozens of people. And when it was all ready, we hit publish. At first, it was quiet. A few clicks, then a few hundred, then thousands. Reddit picked it up immediately, especially since it tied back to the viral wedding clip. Twitter lit up. LinkedIn started buzzing. Did you see this about Donald Williams? Then the media came calling. News sites picked up the story. Prominent business consultant accused of misconduct by former employees. Ex-staff exposed toxic culture behind powerhouse Donald Williams. Within 48 hours, he was trending. His foundation pulled their support. 2 companies dropped him from their board of advisors. And then came the biggest blow. A formal investigation was opened. The SEC. Fraud. It was real. It was happening. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt powerful. For the first time in my life, the man who always made me feel small was being held accountable. But with that power came something unexpected. Fear. One night, a week after the site went live, I was walking home from work alone. Brian had to stay late, and I wanted to clear my head. It was cold. Quiet. I turned the corner to our building. And stopped. A black car was idling across the street. And sitting inside, staring straight at me, was my father. He didn't get out. Didn't roll down the window. Just watched. I froze. My fingers tightened around my purse strap, my legs rooted to the concrete. Then he drove away. No words. No gestures. Just silence. But I knew what that meant. This wasn't over. I ran up to our apartment, slammed the door, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking. My heart thumped like a war drum. Brian got home 30 minutes later and found me on the couch, knees pulled to my chest. He was here, I whispered. Brian's face went pale. What did he say? Nothing. He just watched me. Brian knelt in front of me. We're calling the police. I nodded. We filed a report the next morning. There wasn't much they could do since he hadn't made direct contact. But they documented it. We added cameras, changed passwords, stayed alert. But I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. And then, just when I thought I was past the worst, I got the letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter, folded neatly, left in the mail slot of our apartment building. No envelope, no return address. It just read, "You think you've won, but I taught you how to fight, remember? I'm not done." I read it 3 times before I let myself cry. Brian called our lawyer, then Megan, then the police again. I felt like I was spiraling. Had I gone too far? Had I turned into him? Brian pulled me aside that night. "Sarah, look at me," he said. "This isn't revenge. This is truth. He's just angry you're not afraid of him anymore." "But I am afraid," I whispered. Brian took my hands in his. "Then let's end this. Really end it. Not just for us, but for everyone." And that's when he told me the plan. The real plan. Not a website. Not an article. A speech. Live. Public. On the biggest stage we could find. And once we gave that speech, there would be no turning back. Because the whole world would finally know the truth about Donald J. Williams. And what he did to me. And what I did back. The idea was wild. Terrifying. And perfect. Brian had quietly reached out to a friend of his who worked in event planning for a Women in Tech conference held every spring in San Francisco. The theme this year? Reclaiming Power, Stories of Resilience and Rising. They had an open keynote spot. The moment Brian showed them the viral wedding video, the website, the Reddit posts, they called me within an hour. "Your story," the event organizer said, "is what people need to hear." I said yes. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not with my father watching me from parked cars, slipping letters through my door. Not with the investigation still open. Not with the fear creeping into my lungs every time I stepped outside. So I prepared. Hard. I wrote the speech by hand first. Then rewrote it on my laptop. I practiced every night. Alone. Then in front of Brian. Then Leah. Then Brian's mom, who cried and hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. "You're not just speaking for you," she said. "You're speaking for every girl who is told to stay quiet." And I felt it. That old fear slowly starting to melt into something stronger. Resolve. The morning of the conference, I woke up before the sun. I couldn't sleep. I showered, braided my hair, and sat on the hotel bed staring at my dress. It wasn't white like my wedding dress. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was deep navy. Powerful. Still soft. Brian kissed my forehead before I left and whispered, "Burn it down, babe." I smiled. "I will." The event hall was packed. Hundreds of women. Students. CEOs. Journalists. Survivors. Some wore suits. Some wore hoodies. Some held notebooks. Others held hands. I stepped up onto the stage, heart pounding. The lights hit my face. The mic was warm in my hand. And I began. I was taught that silence was strength, that emotions were weakness, that being seen was dangerous. The room was still. I spoke of childhood birthdays spent alone, of a mother's love extinguished too early, of a father who taught me that love had conditions. And when I finally found happiness, when I found someone who loved me without earning it, I thought maybe he'd show up. I paused. Breathed. He didn't. I talked about the phone call, the words that cut, the refusal to walk me down the aisle, the absence that echoed through everything. And then I told them what came next, the website, the whistleblowers, the stories that weren't mine, but were part of the same pain. I saw nods in the crowd, silent tears, fists curled. I used to think I needed his love to feel whole, but I don't. I never did. A quiet murmur of affirmation rippled through the audience. Because I have people now. People who show up. Who see me. Who believe me. I looked up, directly at the crowd, voice steady. And I have myself. The applause began slow. Soft. Then built. Faster. Louder. And just as I stepped back from the mic, a hand went up in the front row. It was Megan. She stood, tears in her eyes. Then another woman stood. Then another. Until half the room was standing. Applauding. Crying. With me. For me. And for themselves. After the speech, the media requests exploded. Articles, podcasts, TV segments. My father vanished. The SEC investigation escalated. Multiple former employees came forward now, emboldened. Anonymous tips flooded the hotline. He was facing serious charges: fraud, misappropriation of funds, workplace harassment. A court date was set. He tried to send another letter. I never opened it. I didn't need to, because the last laugh wasn't a laugh at all. It was a truth. A full, beautiful truth that echoed louder than anything he had ever said to me. I didn't just survive him. I outgrew him. My wedding may have started without my father at my side, but it ended with me surrounded by love, by light, by people who lifted me, and by a husband who knew that healing isn't a finish line. It's a choice you make every day. 6 months later, Brian and I sat on a rooftop at sunset, overlooking the city. He handed me a tiny envelope. "What's this?" I asked, opening it. Inside was a photo of a house. Not a mansion. Not flashy. Just a cozy place with a porch swing and a big oak tree in front. "Our new beginning," he said softly. I smiled. Not because of the house, but because for the first time in my life, I knew I was walking into a future I chose. Not one I had to survive. Not one built out of someone else's shadow, but mine. And I knew, without a single doubt in my heart, that I'd already gotten the last laugh. And it was everything I needed it to be.